Stephen, would you like to come up here and explain to the people how vulnerable and weak we really are walking around with phones and computers? Thanks, Steve.
Good evening. I must say, feeling like a little bit of imposter syndrome right now after having listened to people who have spoken earlier. I would like to acknowledge previous speakers and the fantastic people who've been working in the kitchens and provided us with yummy food. So thank you very much for that. My name's Stephen. Ever since I was 6 or 7 years old, I remember the last day of the school term when this guy comes up the driveway. We live out in the country, and you live out in the country and someone comes up the driveway, you tend to notice because you know everyone around you. So that's when I got into computers at the age of about 7, and I've been doing it for well, I'm still doing it. I didn't have a break. I've been doing it for the vast majority of my life. I managed to survive exile when mandates occurred, and remain currently employed as a systems administrator / programmer at a large educational institution in the city. My background is with obviously computers, but I also have other side hobbies in security as well. I program microcontrollers and I write software for them. If anyone remembers the original 80s TV program Knight Rider, you remember the original autonomous talking car with a smart-ass attitude? I have built one of those, currently out in the car park.
Go on, right.
Haven't driven a lot lately because, you know, petrol being what it is. So I've spent the vast majority of my life being always fascinated by computers, but at the same time, as time has gone on, I have instinctively felt that things are wrong. And I think I've been feeling it since about the 90s. And I guess I've been gifted with the ability to be able to pay attention to intuition. And when, if I ever ignore intuition comes behind me, smacks me on the back of the head and say, "Getting the lesson now, dumbass, are we?" So as we've become more connected with our computer systems, we have been succumbed to a very large system of convenience. We have chosen things that will give us pretty things, and we have sacrificed that over privacy. Now, I know this is a stupid question to ask in front of an audience like this, but if you cast your mind back to the way you felt and thought 2 years ago, who here could honestly say that they felt they never had anything to hide? Can anyone honestly say, yes, that was me? Does anyone know other people who still think that way? Well, everyone's got something to hide. And next time someone says to you, "I've got nothing to hide," that's when you can ask them a bunch of very simple questions. You say, "Okay, please give me all your credit card information, your mother's maiden name, give me your address and passport information, so on and so on and so on. Give me information on your medical history." And these are very simple questions, and these are things that are all private to us. But when you start stringing them out one after the other, hopefully someone who's not suffering from cognitive dissonance will go, "Oh yeah, maybe you're right." People also get things confused between secrecy and privacy. They are very different things. When you go to the toilet, and hoping you shut the door, everybody knows what you've gone in there to do. You've gone to read a magazine, get some time to yourself, things like that. People know what you're doing in there. That's not a secret. But you can do that while having privacy. When you go into a clothing store, you want to go and buy some clothes, you want to try it on. And assuming you don't go into the changing cubicle with a consenting adult, you go in there to try on some clothes. Everyone knows you've gone in to try on clothes. You have privacy, but it's not a secret what you're doing. So they are some very simple everyday examples you could use to help explain those very fundamental aspects of our lives to people. As simple stuff works at the end of the day. So when I tend to talk, I have, it's a very busy place up here, lots of thoughts going on at once, so I will jump around from subject to subject because I'm just like that, so that's my disclaimer, so I just want to manage expectations. So we have the internet, which has been a double-edged sword. It has been able to give us so much information, and often too much information, but it has enhanced our ability to communicate with people everywhere and get a greater understanding of all kinds of different cultures because we now have that ability. But it has a much darker side too. And I always find a little bit of history is a good thing, so I'll keep in theme with previous people who've spoken tonight. So a long time ago, when Adam said to Eve, "How you doing?" about 1981, we started using a thing called IPv4. Now, this is Internet Protocol version 4. This is what basically started off the internet in the way that we use now. Before that, we had other things. We had a thing called ARPANET, which went on to make the core of the internet. And there were many different networks, and when you wanted to talk to someone on that network, you needed to have a terminal for that system. And if you wanted to talk to somebody on another system, you needed that terminal. Back then, computers were quite a bit bigger than they are now, so you can imagine how much space that all took up. Fortunately, they figured that one out. So, what's IPv4? Well, you've seen this. Every time you look at the back of your router, you look at the back, you'll see an example of a Class C private IP address. And it usually starts off with the numbers 192.168.1.1, and that's the IP address of your router. Now, when they thought this up, it was the system that allowed for 2 to the power of 32 unique IP addresses. So that's about 4.3 billion. Now, back then, they thought, shitloads, we'll never use them all up. And back when things started off, then there were very few people actually using the internet. There were research institutions, government agencies, the military, and things like that. So these IP addresses were just given out willy-nilly because they never thought that people would be ordering pizza, which the first time that ever happened actually was, I think it was Pizza Hut in San Jose, California, 1994 was the first time anyone ordered pizza on the internet. Fun fact. So we realised that we're going to run out of these things. So in 1998 they finally ratified the successor to IPv4. And you're thinking, oh, it must be IPv5. But it's not, it's IPv6. IPv5 exists, but it was used for something else. Now, that allows us to represent unique addresses for a substantial number of machines. It's a mind-boggling number. If you think 2 to the power of 32 gets you 4.3 billion, 2 to the power of 33 gets you double that. So around 8.6 billion unique IP addresses. Now these addresses are so unique in the sense that your latest order off AliExpress, when you go, wait, cool, my hair curl has just arrived, your home address is different to everyone else's address. And so it is with IPv4, but also IPv6. This number is so huge, people have come up with a variety of different ways to express this so that you can try and get your head around how massive this number is. Sure, it's not as big as 2 to the power of 129, but it's still big. If you took 2 to the power of 32 and And this one, I'm not sure if this is true, but if you took all the atoms on the surface of the Earth, maybe that's natural atoms and maybe not counting people, if you took all those atoms and assigned each one of those a single IPv6 address, you would have enough addresses to do all of planet Earth and then do it again another 100 times. If you gave an address out since the beginning of time as we think it started, at the rate of 1 every second, we would still be doing it. If you assumed an Earth population of about 6.5 billion, and I know we're pretty much close to 8, but if you gave every person on the planet of the Earth, well, if you took up the whole space and gave it to all the people, assuming a population of 6.5 billion, you could give a single person 2 to the power of 95 IP addresses. In other words, they would have the capacity to hold the existing internet several times over. Now, I mention the reference to people intentionally because what if, hypothetically speaking, there was a global pandemic, and what say, hypothetically speaking, they have a magic vaccine to solve this problem, and what if, hypothetically speaking, this contained self-assembling nanotechnology with antennas that were in tune to 5G and things like that. You know, never mind the Internet of Things, you have the Internet of Bodies now. You have enough IP addresses to address every single human now and for a long time to come. That's a problem. Now, I don't know, and I've hypothesized how you would assign an address to a person. And the first thing that popped in my head was RFID tags. Now, if you don't know what they are, so if you've ever gone and bought something from a shop and you walked out the door and they released the hounds on you because they forgot to take the tag off your clothing, or they forgot to scan it on the scanner so that when you walked out the system didn't, you know, when you walk out the door and you've got those 2 things on either side. So they are creating low-level energy fields, and RFID tags are passive, which means they don't require their own source of energy in order to be running. Conversely, with an active system which has its own power supply and does the same thing. So you're walking out the door in this electric field, and these RFID tags have a coil in them. And as you walk out, if the coil is energized, the chip comes to life, and the sensors read the tag, goes and checks with the computer and says, is this item that's walking out the door been paid for? And if not, they let you know, because things get out in the shop. So I don't know if that's what they might be thinking of doing, but that was just a random thought that popped in my head one day. So the biggest, we have lots of problems in it. I can't really quantify the biggest. We have, via very slow progression, embraced technology with all these kinds of promises that never actually happened, like the paperless office. Machines have never created more paper than ever before, mostly because they don't always talk to each other very well. But we've clearly embraced technology in such a way that it has enhanced our lives, but we don't know what's actually going on in the background, and this is something that really bothers me a lot. Mostly because the code in our lives now run by algorithms is not open for everyone to see all of the time. I am a very strong advocate for free open source software, such to the point that in 2019 I was the instigator, the chair, the MC and the media person for the largest grassroots conference in the Southern Hemisphere that I held here in Christchurch called linux.conf.au. That is the name of the conference, plus the actual website name, so it's quite easy to remember. I decided to have the 20th anniversary chapter here in Christchurch because it had been to Auckland, Wellington and Dunedin, and I thought, well, I need to correct this injustice and it has to come here. So the rest was history. Free open source software, if you have not come across this before, is basically software that you can, in simple terms, read. If you went to the supermarket and you buy food and you're somebody who reads food labels, and I'm one of those people, particularly if you have allergies or know people that have allergies, the first thing you do is read the ingredients, because you need to know what's inside that food, because if you don't and you have allergies, you could have a very bad day or even longer. So that's important to you. Now imagine if you couldn't do that. Imagine if there were no ingredients lists. All you had to go on was what was on the packaging. And you're looking at pizza and like, I think that looks like mushrooms, but I can't tell. And same thing with software. What if you can't read what that software is doing? Most of the software that was used out there today is pretty much like that. However, if you're using systems that are using free open source software, then either you can look at it, or if you don't want to, there are people out there who can because they want to. I run, excuse me, where I work, all our systems do run free open source software, and we depend upon it. And actually, the majority of the internet does run it. If you took away, if you were to click your fingers and take away free open source software, you basically have no internet. Your router at home that connects you to the internet itself would go away. Everybody running an Android tablet or phone would cease to function. The top 500 supercomputers in the world are all running free open source software as well. It goes on and on and on and on. The International Space Station runs free open source software. Best example of free open source software is Linux, and I use that and I use pretty much nothing else. Excuse me. Android phones, they at their core originally do run free open source software, but then Google comes along and shoves their own stuff on top. If you're using an Apple device, just don't. If you're using an Apple device, don't. I like to use the analogy whereby the best thing to do with an Apple device is to put on a pair of goggles, acquire a hammer and nail, and drive a nail through the middle of it. The goggles is to make sure that if the battery explodes, you don't rearrange your face. Everything about Apple is closed source, and your iPhone is one of the most ultimate spy tools that a government or corporate overlord could ever wish for. When it's turned off, it ain't off. It's always on. Similarly, when you go to bed and you sleep, you're not off. You're unconscious. You're on standby until the dog comes and licks your face or the kids run in and jump on the bed. Then you wake up. Apple phones are never off, and you can't take out the battery because they're waterproof. So don't bother even trying to drain your phone because they're waterproof. Hammer and nail, nothing argues with that. Or running it over perhaps. Whatever floats your boat. If you have a Google phone, then I'm not saying that Google is better. I frame it in terms of it's less bad, because you have options in that way. You can have a Google phone, and depending on if it's a supported model, because there are thousands and thousands out there, you can take out the base operating system that it comes with and replace it with something free open source. It is called AOSP, an Android Open Source Project. So this is a version of Android that has all the Google spyware stuff taken off, and all the other software that maybe Samsung put on there, or Motorola, or LG, or whoever. So you can still have a smartphone without all the extra spy stuff on top. Now, because the Android Open Source Project is open source, the code is open for anybody to read who feels like reading it. And people do that. How can you hide something nefarious and something that is in plain sight? I'm not sure how you could. So if you want to, and I strongly recommend that you do, consider using a phone that doesn't have spyware by default. A good website to go to is somewhere like lineageos.org, and that's lineage, Lineage, OS.org. there is, and I hesitate to use the word, graphene OS, which works only on Google Pixel phones. There's a variety of phones you have to choose from, but not everything is supported, so don't go rushing out buying the latest one and thinking you can install Lineage onto it. If you go to their wiki page, they have a list by manufacturer and the model number, and you can go and look at that and go, oh yeah, I like that phone because I like the screen size, it's really large or it's really small depending on how big your pants pocket is or whatever. And so you have options around that, and after you've done that, then you need to consider looking at other things that you do in your digital lives. Who's doing your email? If you're using things like Gmail, Hotmail, all those big free things, don't. With Gmail, Google's basically an advertising company, right? So when you receive email on Gmail and say you've received information about tickets you've bought, aeroplane tickets. So they read that and analyse what it says, and then you see an advertisement for a car rental company or a hotel nearby where you're flying to, and things like that. That's not an accident. That's by design. That's how it is. So if you want a system that is a lot better, then I would consider one's called Tutanota. I personally use a German one called Postio. They are part of the 14 Eyes network, but at the same time their attitude towards government oversight, in my view, is absolutely in the right place. They fight everything. A lot of people do try to go to Proton Mail that has a reputation, but it's also a bit of a honeypot, so people like the US administration always like to go after people there. They complied with, in 2020, I think it's roughly 3,017 requests they complied with. They were asked for, but they complied with just over 3,000 requests for information on customer data. One of those situations was when the French police wanted something from the Proton people, and they said no. So the French police just went and asked the Swiss government. The Swiss government asked for it on their behalf, and they got what they wanted anyway because they have to comply with it. You need to use an email system that completely encrypts your inbox and your calendar as well. Your calendar is a record of everything you've ever done, everywhere you've been, and everywhere that you're going to, and who you're meeting with. You want to have an encryption system that is so good that it has a single password, and if you forget that password, no one's getting it. I suggest that you don't, on your phones, use your fingerprint, even though the phones are typically built in such a way that the fingerprint chip is separate from the operating system, so the operating system can't look at it directly. That doesn't mean to say that it's never going to be hacked. And I'm not terribly strong on knowledge of laws, but I do know that the American Constitution, by the Fifth Amendment Act, says that you cannot self-incriminate. It has been demonstrated in the court of law there as a precedent that there is a difference between using a fingerprint to lock something versus knowing the combination to something. The combination, like a PIN code or a password, is something that exists in your mind. But your fingerprint is something physical, so that's quite different. And the other reason is that, as far as I know, you've only got one set of fingerprints, so when they get compromised, you're hosed. With email clients, I personally use one on a phone called Fairmail. You will find that in the F-Droid store. You will not find it in the Play Store. Play Store is all the Google stuff. You can install on a Google phone, an Android phone, an alternative Play Store called F-Droid. That's the letter F and Droid as in what R2-D2 and C3PO are. There's a lot of good stuff in there with free open source software. Fairmail is brilliant because one of the cool things it does is that it detects and stops beacon attacks. Now, beacon attack is a technique that is commonly used by a lot of companies. They don't necessarily know they're doing it. And what it is that when you're reading the email, when you're reading through all the words, there's often pictures in there. Maybe a company logo or something like that. And the beacon attack is a single pixel. And it is the same colour as the background, normally the background, same colour as the background of the email. Or maybe it's embedded in one of the other pictures. Now, iPhones, when you read email on those, if you're thinking, wow, my phone's so fast because when I look at the message, all the images are there. No, what it's done is it's preloaded the images so that when you do go and look at it, the images are already there. At the same time, it loads the pixel. Now, when this pixel gets loaded into your email viewer, it goes and phones home and fetches the image. Now, when that's happened, the remote system knows when you looked at the email. It knows the time, and it knows the date, and it knows that you've looked at it. It knows that you're receiving their messages. You could also get around this by intentionally just not loading any images at all. There are some things that I have signed up to where I can see where the beacon is if I had chosen to load it, because email shows you. There's a little icon there that tells you that, yeah, I've not loaded I've got your back, I haven't loaded the naughty beacon attack image. Because every few months I get an email saying, hey, you aren't still waiting on our mailing list? Because we think you haven't been getting our messages. Well, I have been, I've been reading the whole jolly lot, but you just don't know that I have because I haven't been loading the pixel attack. So that's a really great email program to be using. Another one you could use is called K9. K9 as in the dog, the letter K hyphen and then a 9. You'll also find that in the Play Store and on F-Droid. On the desktop, I would certainly use one called Thunderbird and pretty much nothing else unless you use something that only does images. F-A-I-R, mail. It's also a free open source package, and the guy, I sometimes wonder if he does anything else with his life because the amount of times he pumps out updates is pretty mind-blowing. For a web browser, it should be no surprise that you should not use anything made by Microsoft or Google, so avoid Google Chrome, anything made by Microsoft. Instead, I suggest you use something called Brave, which is based upon open source Chromium. When you go to certain websites like everybody's favourite reliable source of news, stuff.co.nz, you'll see the amount of trackers that it's blocking, and when you go to other websites and go, wow, okay, so it's blocking this, so what else are other sites doing? And it can be quite eye-opening and a little bit frightening is all the tracking advertisements and the Facebook pixels as well, because you don't have to have a Facebook account in order for Facebook to track you, because they embed stuff in other images through advertisements, just in the same way that Google does. So you want to make sure that you block all of that. If you use Firefox, which is what I use, as well as Brave, there are various plugins that you can install to help prevent that. One of them is called uBlock Origin. That's the letter U, block origin, that's all one word. So you can install that. There is a clone, if you like, of Firefox called LibreWolf that has all that stuff built in. There's Privacy Badger, which throws away cookies. Cookies are another tracking technique that used to be used a long time ago, and then the advertisers started to realise that in this cat and mouse game that people were starting to block cookies, so okay, now we need another way of getting around this. And under the topic of, when my mind jumps back to a topic I've just finished, and I'm going to bring it up again, when you get messages, when you get emails, and there's a link you need to click on, you can't really do this on the phone, but on your computer, just hover the mouse over the link and see where that link references. If you can read all the text and it looks sensible, then it's possibly okay. Things like uBlock Origin should detect if there is something nefarious going on. The reason I bring this up is because often those links have tracking links, so even if you've prevented the tracking beacons from showing up, the fact that you've clicked on a link is yet another way of indicating that you've read the message. These sorts of links can be fairly obvious because there's a very long line of what looks like gibberish, random numbers and letters, and that's a unique ID that is specific to you. Not anyone else, to you. So you want to make sure that you don't want to give the game away. Make things hard for them. I'm in the habit of, when I get certain communications, I say, the union at work, and they send out these things, I'm in the habit of replying back saying, can you just email me the document, thanks, because there's a spyware link that I'm not clicking on it, so just send it to me anyway. It's a habit I like to keep up. Now, yes, yep.
Will you be sharing about VPNs tonight?
Yep.
Stephen, can I ask you a question? Would it be all right to put on the whiteboard later on, or sometime, or send it through to me, of the different things that people can do to protect themselves?
I'm hoping people will, yes in principle, but there's so much stuff that writing it all down takes a very long time. So, hi Mom, I'm just waving at the camera there. It's been documented, right? Cool. Yeah, so if there's anything that I haven't mentioned that you think I'm not going to mention and I could have mentioned, please pull me up on it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Right, so I was talking about email, and then before that I was talking about something else, and I can't remember what that was, so I'll change tack again and go, talk about smart TVs. Well, a smart TV is not a TV, in the same way that a smartphone is not a smartphone. Smartphone is actually a miniaturised computer with a touchscreen that has the ability to make phone calls and text messages. A smart TV is not a TV, it is a computer attached to a whopping great big screen which happens to have a TV tuner built into it. Also has a microphone built into it and other things like that. So if you happen to have one of these, the first thing I suggest you do is do not connect it to the internet at all. End of story, job done. There was I read a few years ago, there was a guy in the UK who had an LG smart TV, and he got a bit curious when all of a sudden the TV starts showing other TV programs based on stuff he had been watching. So he got, what's going on here? So the TV having a wireless connection, he connected it through an unsecured channel to his router. With his laptop, he analysed the traffic going between the TV and his router, and after a little bit of donkey work, he discovered that every single key press on the remote control was going back to LG in South Korea. So, don't connect it to the internet, full stop, just don't do it. What we have at home is an older TV. It's actually a 3D TV that will 3D any input you give it, and use those cheap glasses that you have used to get at Hoyts, the passive glasses. I have a Raspberry Pi. I love Raspberry Pi in the food sense and also in the computer sense. A Raspberry Pi is a miniature computer which will run on the sniff of a smelly electron. They will go forever, and there's a variety of models. I use one of those running Kodi. That is my entertainment system, and I have other methods of watching media that I like. And if the internet goes away, then I'm not too bothered because I've still got my media. Let's talk about routers. Routers are the thing that is not a woodworking tool, that's a router. Routers are things that connect you on roads and also hook you up to the greater network known as the internet. So, for a time, Spark and Vodafone when they were handing out modems to everyone, they typically handed out the Huawei HG659. That was the model that they gave people. Now, in terms of hardware, that was a decent bit of kit. but then they nobbled at putting crappy software on it. And those things, yes, you think you've got the administrator user code and password because it's written on the bottom so you can log in and do stuff to it. But did you know there's a second one? The second user code, admin level user code and password, your ISP has it. Now, their argument for this is that when you have trouble connecting to the internet, they can simply connect onto it and help you with stuff. I have a natural mistrust for larger corporates and organisations. It's just something I feel. So you can imagine the surprise when I told the tech guy on the phone what the second level administrator password was on my modem when I had it. And he goes, how did you figure that out? And I said, well, I figured it had to be reversibly encryptable. And I found it out of the XML page and I went to the second level admin page and then I put it, did a 120 bits, this had reverse encryption on it, and then there it was. And you go, oh, okay. At that point I got rid of it, and what I have now at home is I have fibre, so I have a router which I can replace the software on, because again, a router is basically a miniaturised computer with some Wi-Fi antennas and stuff on it. It runs an operating system. They all run Linux. They all have free open source software, except I suppose if you ask your ISP, can I have a copy of the software you've got running in the router, they probably could deny you. I've replaced it with something called OpenWRT. Now, this is a wickedly capable bit of software to have on your router. To put it in real terms, if it was a Swiss Army knife, it would make MacGyver's Swiss Army knife look like a plastic cutlery set. In that it is wickedly complicated and not for the faint of heart. However, it is very capable. It can do things like, if you do not have a VPN, it can download a list of websites. These are free plugins you can install that prevent web pages that reference all these tracking sites from ever loading on your computer systems in the first place. And it updates these all the time. So anytime your computer goes to a website and that website has a link on it that goes to one of these tracking places, your router goes, not here you don't. That also has the effect of speeding up your internet browsing too, because it's not waiting on tracking links and other images to load and stuff like that. You can also have your router take care of your VPN connections for you. So there's a lot of VPN providers out there, and it's a very, very busy place. I use one called NordVPN for the moment. I say for the moment because in this day and age, you can probably appreciate it's an ever-changing landscape. So what might be a good idea today? It's a bit like jalapenos, right? Life is like jalapenos. What you do today could burn your ass tomorrow. So when I make a recommendation, like when I say use NordVPN, at the moment it seems like a good idea. They're based in Panama, so they're not part of the Five Eyes networks, countries rather. So touch wood that it stays that way. There is a company that called Cape, I think it's Cape, K-A-P-E, who changed their name after some software they created ended up becoming the basis of malware, which they didn't intend. Then they wanted to change their image, and so they changed their name as well. They have gone around buying up a bunch of different VPN providers. One of them is called PIA, Private Internet Access. Another one, which is fairly popular, is called ExpressVPN. They bought that one for $981 million. I had to read that line 3 times because I thought that's a truckload of money for a VPN, but clearly they thought, yeah, we've got the money, so whatever. And, sorry?
What about Surfshark?
Surfshark? Surfshark is now owned by Nord themselves, so that is their attitude was that Surfshark remain a separate company, even though Nord own it. So I suppose it's supposed to mean they don't influence anything they do, but watch this space, I suppose, is all one can say about that. When you're reading VPN reviews on the internet, be careful what you're reading, because it's not uncommon for VPN providers to write the articles that you're reading on recommending websites. So it's not a true and accurate reflection of the article author's point of view. So keep digging, keep reading. But yes, if you want someone to blame me because I said go use NordVPN, it's available for all platforms, including Linux, which is why I use it. If there wasn't a Linux client, I wouldn't be using it. Plain and simple. Right, there's probably lots of other things I need to be thinking of mentioning that have escaped my mind because it's been a long week. So I'll take questions at this point because that might jog my mind to think of other things. Yeah. EMF protections, yes. So if you want to protect yourself against EMF, the first thing to do is to not have a cell phone. The second thing to do is to not have Wi-Fi, not have a microwave oven. Anything like that that gives off electromagnetic radiation. However, if negotiating certain things in your house, you need to find yourself compromising. What I do in my house, with the router that I have, I get it to automatically shut off the Wi-Fi when people are asleep. And we have an external garage so that I have one out there as well, and I connect the house and the garage via an Ethernet cable, and I have the power threshold of the router in the garage, which is also running OpenWRT, just enough so it will come into the lounge, not into the rest of the house. And I have it automated so that I don't need to think about it. If you don't want to do that, the other thing you could potentially do, if you could negotiate it with other people who live in your house, is just to get one of those timers. You get it Bunnings and Mitre 10, set the timer, plug your router into it, and have it turn off. But when it does that, it's going to kill your internet access totally, and then you'll be switching to whatever internet you have with mobile broadband on your phone/tablet. And by that stage, you need to have a VPN client running on that, because for me, not using a VPN is equivalent to walking around outside with no pants on.
Is it that bad?
Especially on a cold day.
What about electronic boxes on the side of the house?
The smart meters? Yeah, so if you want to stop smart meters from working, what makes a really good EMF shield are baking trays, nice thick, and stick that in front of it, and maybe on the other side of it. If you've got someone in a bedroom who's on the other side of that, get their head physically as far away from it as possible. The minimum safe distance for a child up to the age of a teenager is beyond arm reach. The bone density of the skull for kids is a whole lot thinner. While that does repel some radiation, it doesn't repel all of it. So if you've got teenagers and kids holding phones up to their head, it's going from one side of the skull through the brain to the other side. So that's why I say the minimum safe distance is out of arm's reach. So if you can minimise the amount of wireless in your life, then that's a great thing. If you want to still use a smartphone, you can often, via the USB connection, you can get an Ethernet adapter so that you can then plug the phone via an Ethernet cable into the back of your router and shut off the wireless. There's another good reason you potentially might want to do that. If you go to the website wigle.net, that's wigle.net, this is a database of all the wireless access points on the planet. All of them. Well, I haven't counted them all, so I can't verify that statement. I can't say that it's true, but it's a lot. So you can go look up your address on that website, and if you see a dot beside it, chances are they know about its existence. So if you want to disappear a little bit, turn down the power level on your router so that when they're going past and scanning for wireless access points, yours doesn't show up, or better yet, don't even have wireless. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I mean, this has been really educational, and you sound very reasonable. You're certainly an expert, and I just wanted to know, I've heard a lot about 5G. You know, some people think it's a bioweapon, or I mean, a electromagnetic weapon, and other people think, you know, that's crazy talk. Where do you stand on the threat of 5G?
There's a lot of things we've been telling people who suffer from cognitive dissonance that is quite simple and straightforward to us, that on other topics sounds like crazy talk to them. Before 5G was even invented, there have been people who have always been sensitive in their bodies to wireless radiation. There was a guy, first name Brian, last name was something I can't recall. He found that he had to give up his BMW. He then started driving around in his wife's shitty old Datsun because the amount of radiation coming out of the car was more than he could take. And so he had to take a lot of EMF out of his life. Now, 5G is a short millimetre wave. It's not great over long distances, but it's higher powered, and so that's why they need to have, for it to be effective, a lot more access points. So I've heard from people who are in the radio, who are radio engineers, who have observed that the self-assembling nanotechnology, antenna-looking stuff that certain people have in their bodies now attenuates quite nicely to 5G. So the short answer to your question, I think, is yes. It's a threat. If you want to, if you have a wireless device and you can't turn off the wireless for some reason, wrapping it in tin foil works pretty well. If you want to, you could, if you're good at origami, you could fold it to the shape of a tin foil hat if you wanted, but just as long as you wrap the entire thing, because if the wire, the signal will not penetrate it. And in terms of wireless health, it's better to not have it in your front pocket because you've got other body parts at the front part of your body.
Damn, is that why it doesn't work?
And sticking it in your back pocket for three-letter agencies who might be using it as a spy phone, jokes on them if they turn on the microphone and you fart. Yeah.
I turn my internet off at the power every night before I go to bed. Does that do any harm to the computer or?
No, so routers are designed to be able to handle that. The configuration is stored in the flash memory, and the filing system is such that if the power gets cut, nothing should be corrupted.
But once it's turned off, it's not doing anything?
No, well, yeah, once you physically remove power, it's off. Which kind of takes me back to, on phones, Apple are absolutely wickedly awful at this. So when I said that phones don't turn off, they don't turn off. Apple have their own little mesh network that relies on Bluetooth BLE. Bluetooth technology has evolved over time such that it can reach larger distances, and they will find other phones, and that thing will keep working while that battery has breath in its aluminium case. So that is another reason why you don't want to have anything made by Apple. Google phones, they have wireless access scanning, so as you're walking around, it's continually scanning for wireless access points. And with GPS, if that's working, and triangulation from cell phone towers, you can start to narrow down the physical locations of this, and stuff like that can go towards the database on that Whirlpool.net website that I mentioned a little while ago. So if you were to ask me, am I being tracked? You can probably tell I'm going to say yes to that question. So if you're thinking of asking me, that's my answer. If you had a Google phone we were able to replace the operating system with Android open source. Wi-Fi scanning is not on by default. If you wish, you can turn that on, but it is off by default. Some years ago, I read a research paper whereby these guys had discovered this really large file in an iPhone. And I thought, what's this? And of course, the bigger the file and the more mysterious it is, the juicier it gets. So they managed to crack that bad boy open and learned that this large mysterious file contained GPS coordinates of wireless access points that the phone had picked up. And so they mapped all these out. And Apple said, oh no, we're not spying on you to do this. And I thought, well, if that statement were to be true, then what they're doing is spying on everyone who's got a wireless access point. The map that they showed was along a railway track. So on one side of the railway track is everyone's houses and all the wireless access points that people had in their homes. This particular, and I mean they had one phone that they did this with, had all these access points in it. So you think about how many people have got iPhones and they have wireless access game turned on into default Google phones. So you can imagine that we're still walking around cataloguing the world. Yeah.
Question to do with Aladdin. If we all stopped right now doing what we're doing and changed, no phones, no anything like that, will a new algorithm be written by the master computer?
The other problem we have is that we have cameras everywhere. We have facial recognition, and it's pretty good. Years ago, I read that the Japanese had developed a system. I'm trying to remember the numbers to make sure I get this right. I think it was so fast it could analyse photos and recognise individually 50 million people in a few seconds.
What year was it?
It was in the last 10 years. So that's also a problem. The other thing I think too is that there's a trick to not standing out. In other words, if you can master the art of blending in and looking like everyone else, then you basically, I apologise when I don't for this reference, it becomes like the chameleon circuit on the TARDIS. You know the TARDIS is there. This is a Doctor Who reference for anyone who's not into sci-fi. You know the TARDIS is there, but then you sort of don't know it's there. So if you can blend in, then you're doing well. If you end up, and you know you're doing well, if when you go to websites, it's the advertisements that are not, that are being displayed can in no way be linked to you. If you start getting adverts that have got nothing to do with your sex, age, personal preferences about any subject at all, then either their algorithm's crappy or you're starting to look like nobody else. And the other cool thing with having with smartphones, you've basically got two choices in the sense that you could have a Linux phone which withholds information, or if you have an Android open source phone, it takes a leaf out of our government's book and uses disinformation. So by that what I mean is you can use certain things in the Google Play Store and you can install those on your phone, but you don't need a Google account to do it because there's a little thing called micro-G, and micro-G is not to be confused with the greeting yo yo what's up G. It acts as a bridge and allows you to get those applications onto your phone, typically banking apps, that sort of thing. And it emulates the Google Services Framework. Without that, a lot of applications won't work because they require it for notifications, push notifications. So you've got push notifications and polling notifications. What's the difference? A push notification is like you're sitting at home watching TV and the doorbell goes and, oh yes, sweet, the courier's here with my hair curler from AliExpress. and then you go back to doing what you're doing. Polling works in the sense that, well, I wonder if the query has been yet, so you get up and go and check. No, it hasn't. Little while later, you get up, there's a query been? No, it hasn't. Little while later, there's a query been? Yep, it has. So that's the difference between a push notification and polling. Your polling would be rechecking to see if, say, a new email has turned up. Things like that. Yeah. One moment, please.
Hi, I just wanted to ask what your thoughts were on those that live rurally, and now that we have this Starlink set up, and that you can connect to for Wi-Fi, and there's another one, Scorch or something, or whatever it's called.
If you have the option where you can use anything with a cable, use a cable. It might be slower, but that's what I would go with, personally speaking. I mean, but at some point you need to weigh up risk versus benefit, and where you feel you personally sit in that spectrum.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. What's your take on these discussions, which are quite common in the alternate media now, of a link between the transhumanist plan and like a global AI? Or what's your take on AI?
Like most things that we as people create, there's a good way to do something, and then there's that other way. So I always make a point of saying to people that when someone comes up with an idea or something, and you're listening to that person express that idea, and if you find yourself thinking, that's a terrible idea, did you actually analyse the idea and that person's implementation when they expressed the idea, or did you mentally jump towards your interpretation of that idea, your execution of the plan? So, yes, I think there is, I mean, nothing surprises me very much anymore given the last 10 years. So, yeah, I would say there is some sort of AI system out there, and we are after all being catalogued and extinguished as much as possible. So, yes, I mean, why would you bother having an AI system if you don't end up tracking everybody?
Anyone else for any more questions? I've just got one or two.
It's not that long. How can it be done to de-Googleise a phone and still have access to the service that the phone operates on? How do you de-Googleise a phone?
How do you de-Google a phone? Well, first things first is you need to find a supported phone. As I mentioned earlier, there are thousands of models out there, and they all have varying hardware. So if you want to know if the phone you have can already be done, or maybe you've got a spare phone kicking around, or you want to go find something second-hand of trading, go to that website I mentioned, lineageos.org, look up their wiki for the devices that support it, because supporting and maintaining an operating system for a bunch of phones done by volunteers is ridiculously hard work, and don't let anyone tell you different. And they have instructions on their website. I've de-Googled phones. It takes 15-ish minutes. It takes longer to reinstall all your applications and set up your email and stuff. You tend to do it in a two-step phase. After you have, I'm going to go off on a side tangent momentarily, and when I finish answering your question, please someone ask me to answer my own question about GPS and faking it, please. Back to your question. You install a thing called TWRP, or Team Win Recovery Project. So when you have gone and activated the developer options on your phone, and you do that, you go to your settings and you scroll down to the very bottom and it says about phone, and you look in there and it says build number. You tap on that 7 times, and as you're tapping on it, it says you've got 6 more taps until you get to developer, and then like 5 and 4, and then when you've got that turned on, then you can turn off other settings that would otherwise prevent you from de-googling your phone. And then you need to power it up, plug it into your laptop in a special mode, then you upload the thing called TWRP, that replaces the bootloader in the phone. Then when you've done that, you can take the image, you upload that to the phone, that takes a few minutes, then the reboot sets itself up and Bob's your uncle. It's true, I had an Uncle Robert. Right.
One more question, and then we've kind of got on to time.
Okay, your question, and then I need to do the GPS thing because it's important.
Is there any particular encryption app for messaging that you would recommend?
I use Signal. The only trouble with Signal is that it uses other people's phone numbers, and everyone's phone numbers have to be in each other's address books, which can then link people together into the groups that you communicate with, things like that. If you want to go next level, you need to look at an application called Session. It works in the same way as Signal, but you do not need a phone number to use it. You have an identity, it sets you up with unique codes that you need to remember, and you can effectively communicate anonymously. So if you, that's not necessarily for the faint of heart. Getting people off using regular text messages, and for the love of God, if anyone's using WhatsApp or anything like that, you have my permission to slap them and just say, I told you to do it. But get them to use Signal, because is the answer to that question. Now back to the GPS thing I wanted to say. So on an Android phone, when you've turned on developer options, one of the cool things it lets you do is fake GPS coordinates. So from the Play Store, look for an application called Fake GPS. That's what it's called. It does what it says on the tin. When you've installed that, you can go back into your developer options, and I can't remember the exact wording of the option that you turn on, but you associate the application of Fake GPS with this particular mode, and then when you turn on GPS, Fake GPS will give it coordinates. So whatever software you're running, it really does think that is where you've told it to be. So if you want it to be in Punakaiki, then on a map you go tap and then it works. I've plugged this into an Android car stereo and turned on Google Maps, and it zoomed me straight into Westport. So it does work. So if you find yourself having to use, I think in particular, and for the love of God, please don't have a smartwatch. Do not use any of those health apps, because I don't think you need to ask them why, you already know. But there are certain applications that require or ask for Bluetooth to be turned on along with GPS. Now you can get around the location tracking thing by providing the fake GPS location and then still use whatever naughty application that was. So that's
the fake GPS is in an app that you'll find somewhere?
Yeah,
Where else do you find it?
you'll find that in the Google Play Store. I don't know what's available on Apple, because the only thing I have to do with Apple is eating them. Sorry? You could probably get the APK from, I don't know if it's an open source product or not.
We use it on the phone.
Right, okay, cool, yeah. When you find it, you can, I mean, even if you install it on a Google phone, you can pull the APK off the phone once it's installed and stick it on something else. Fake GPS has a fish as part of its logo. So when you go looking for it, if you see a fish, you know you found the right one.
Just quickly, a question. Like you were talking about Wi-Fi, but your data. So you turned your Wi-Fi off. You're using your data. What's the effects with that?
If you do that, make sure you use a VPN because your ISP knows everything that you're doing. Yes, websites do these days typically is everything encrypted, but the thing that's been given away is your location. And if you're using a good VPN, like Nord, and the reason I say Nord is because I've tested it out on certain testing sites that track your location. So by using things like changing settings in Firefox, you can fake your location, but having a VPN will then alter your location as well. So, like I say, not use a VPN because it's like not having pants on.
Thanks, Stephen. That's really great. Just one thing before you finish. I looked at some military-grade software that they promoted many years ago, which was little, what are those things that just go up and down with a helicopter? What are they called? Drones. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, military-grade drones. That they dropped out of a plane, like 300,000 or 400,000 of them, that have ID for a certain person in a city. They were excited about having that technology that can fly through the city, look for our pineal gland, and boom, we're dead. So, is that true?
I don't know, that's the first I've heard it, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for your time, sir.
No worries.
Thank you very much.
Unuhia ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātea, kia māma, te kākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara takata. Ko ia rā e roko whakairia ke kiruka kia tina. Tina, haini e, hui e, tāe ki e.
Mai e te tipua, mai e te tawhito. Mai e te kahui o ngā riki, mai e te tawhiwhi atu ki aro mai tāne. Kia ora. Kia pai o ko te pō. Ki wana, kei wani ai tāra, kei tāra wahi a ki te rua I te kero. Hei pau ngā rā hui te ruira kararapa te kawana tope ka riri mau. Au e koro e! Hi-ha! Kau e hi au. O ka matakana! Ko ai te tangata. Kia rere ure! Tiruhanga ngā rua rera. Ngā rua kuri ka whanui raro I a ha. O mari e hoa ma. Kia pai o koto haere ki kāre.